As soon as I got my Fujifilm X-T30 Mark II camera, I bought the XF27mm f2.8 lens to have the most compact setup like the X100F I had before. Yes, I know 27mm isn't the same as 23mm on the X100 cameras, but I'm talking about camera kit size, not focal length. So stop yelling at me, okay? And even though this lens isn't perfect, I enjoy having it in my kit. I made a video review about it, and if you're interested, the link is in the description below. And not long ago, TTartisan sent me their 27mm lens, which is a more affordable alternative to Fuji's lens, to test. Today I want to talk about it since I took the TTartisan lens on my trip to Copenhagen and recently spent some time in the countryside comparing these two lenses side by side. From a price standpoint, the TTartisan 27mm lens is much cheaper than the Fujifilm lens, but could it be better? Let's find out. By the way, both lenses will be linked in the description below, and if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to hit that like button, and let's begin. Let's start with the design. I'll be comparing TTartisan lens to the first version of Fuji's XF27mm lens, which doesn't have an aperture ring and weather resist. That's the only difference between the first and second Fujifilm lens versions. The design of the TTartisan is okay. It's a bit flat and bulkier than the Fujifilm XF lens, but since it's still a very compact lens, I don't see it as a big downside. Both are made from metal. TTartisan weighs 93 grams and Fujifilm lens weighs 84 grams, so both are extremely light. However, I didn't enjoy TTartisan's bottom lens cap because it's bulkier than usual ones due to the USB-C port and contacts for updating the lens. They should be handy, but you can't update the lens via an Apple computer, only Windows, which I don't have. So this lens cap is useless for me, and it also comes off quite easily. So I would appreciate if TTartisan could include a regular bottom lens cap along with this firmware update cap. On the other hand, the top lens cap is very slim and deserves appreciation. It's very thin and I like it a lot. Plus there's more. With this lens you get a small lens hood that you can thread onto the lens or a lens filter. Now with this lens hood, or should I call it hoodie, since it's so small, the top gap becomes narrower and you would think the lens cap wouldn't fit, but it does. TTartisan made a clever design where the lens cap works with both the lens and the hood or with just the lens alone. Design-wise, I still prefer the Fujifilm lens because it's smaller, not by much but still smaller, and has more surface levels, not just flat lines. My first generation Fujifilm lens only has a focus ring, but the TTartisan 27mm lens comes with both a focus ring and an aperture ring. However, the aperture ring isn't as comfortable to use because it's flush with the main surface, with only two pieces sticking above the surface that aren't easy to grab and turn quickly, especially without looking. I would prefer if the whole ring stuck above the surface and the markings were above it, but function-wise it works well if you can get used to holding it by those 2 points that stick above the surface. Now let's talk about how the TTartisan lens performs. Optically it's great except for one flaw: vignetting. I won't lie to you or try to hide it, this lens has the strongest vignetting I've ever seen, but is it really that bad? We Fujifilm shooters often buy these cameras to use film simulations that give our images a retro nostalgic look. Some even add film grain straight to their JPEG images with no way of reversing it. In this context, lens vignetting could add more character to the images. Even though vignetting is usually seen as a flaw, it gives this lens a unique character that you can recognize and use creatively. From these images I took during the evening in Copenhagen, you can see that the vignetting is very visible, especially at f2.8 when the aperture is wide open. As you close down the aperture, the vignetting effect gets weaker. So if you want to minimize the vignetting, try to close the aperture as much as possible if the conditions allows it. Depending on the situation, the vignetting might be less noticeable or blend better with the environment if the scene you're shooting isn't that bright. In this image with the red bicycle in a Copenhagen neighborhood, you almost don't notice the vignetting. For me it blends in perfectly, but in these images of the area where Danish soldiers live, the vignetting is more prominent. Since those buildings are very old, I think the vignetting adds a vintage character to the images, so I wouldn't be this harsh on vignetting. It just depends whether you like it or not. While spending time in the countryside, I compared the TTartisan lens to the Fujifilm XF27mm lens. I found an old Ford Transit and took some shots with my Fujifilm XS20 using the new Reala Ace film simulation and both 27mm lenses. At aperture f3.6 the vignetting on the TTartisan lens is visible, but other than that the differences are minor. The TTartisan lens gives a slight magenta tint while the Fuji lens has a bit more green. By the way, the Reala Ace film simulation is great. I enjoyed shooting with it and was surprised to receive an update with the simulation right after buying the XS20 camera. When I closed the aperture to f4.5 the vignetting on the TTartisan lens improved. The narrower the aperture, the less vignetting you'll see. I talk so much about vignetting because it's the main difference between these two lenses in terms of image quality, along with a slight color tint difference. Here you can see how lenses compare side by side, so you can decide which one you prefer. Don't forget to mention in the comments which lens you like better. Sometimes the TTartisan lens, due to its strong vignetting at widest aperture, darkens the images more than the Fujifilm lens with the same settings, as you can see in these images. Here with the Ford logo, I tried shooting with the TTartisan lens at different apertures to see how the vignetting and depth of field change. Until f11 there is some blur in the background, but at f11 it appears more in focus, and even more so at f16, obviously. When I finished shooting around the old Ford Transit, I went to the road to take a few more shots. With the small white house, I noticed that even though the TTartisan lens has some vignetting, the middle of the image is a bit brighter than with the Fujifilm lens. The tint difference is also more visible, but only if you look at the images side by side. In general, I think it's normal for different brands to have slightly different color readouts because the optics inside the lenses are different, which can lead to a slight color cast. The most important thing is that the color cast isn't way off. In these comparison images, I only noticed the difference when I look closely at the images on the computer. Then I went back to the village to take more photos. This is where the vignetting of the TTartisan lens really shines, adding a vintage touch to the images and sometimes helping to focus attention towards the middle of the frame. The cloudy weather made it hard to get consistent results from both lenses, but I did my best to take a photo with one lens and then quickly swap the other to capture the same image. Here with the apple tree you can see that at aperture f9 the TTartisan lens produces a slightly brighter image in the middle of the frame compared to the Fujifilm lens. Then I stopped by this wood production house to test the vignetting of the TTartisan again. You can see images from aperture f2.8 and at aperture f5 the vignetting is much weaker. At f7 it is almost gone. I also found this yellow house with an open window on the second floor, surrounded by trees. I took images with both lenses, and in my opinion the TTartisan lens at f2.8 with its vignetting gives a better look to the scene. Okay, I talked about vignetting a lot and we could debate whether we like vignetting or not, but I want to mention one thing I liked about the TTartisan lens over the Fujifilm lens, the autofocus. First, it is very quiet and quick. I didn't have any problems missing focus. What's great is that the lens doesn't extend while focusing. With its slightly bulkier design, TTartisan managed to keep the focusing inside the body, unlike the Fujifilm lens, which extends while focusing. Also, the focus motor on the Fujifilm lens is much louder than on the TTartisan. So, for example, when shooting video, I think the TTartisan should be better because the Fujifilm lens would be too loud, and you might hear it in the video. So, what do I think after spending time with both lenses and testing them side by side? Is the TTartisan 27mm lens perfect? No, not at all. But is it bad? I wouldn't say that either. It has one main downside, but in the right hands, this could actually become an advantage and add character to the images. You just need to decide whether you are okay with this aspect of the lens. As I mentioned earlier, some people shoot with Fujifilm in JPEG using film simulation straight in the images, even adding film grain. Others shoot in RAW and edit the images later to their taste. For example, I like to shoot with film simulation applied to JPEG, but I avoid adding film grain from the camera because I want the option to have a clean image and add film grain later. Once you apply film grain in the camera, you won't be able to have clean JPEG images unless you shoot RAW. The TTartisan 27mm lens costs just $160 compared to $400 for the second version of Fujifilm lens. I can see that for some some people it could be a great option if they don't want to spend a lot on a compact lens but still want something for casual shooting. It's similar to how I chose the XT15-45mm lens for the X-T30 Mark II camera because it was cheap. It wasn't the greatest, but for the price I was quite happy with it. Let me know in the comments your opinion on both lenses, which shots you prefer and how you like this new Reala Ace film simulation on my Fujifilm XS20 camera. Thank you TTartisan for sending me this lens for review. Both lenses are linked in the description below. If you enjoyed this video, leave a like and hit the subscribe button so I could see you in the next one. And let me know what other topics you would like to see in future videos from me. For now, have a nice day, keep your heads up and keep shooting.